In this lecture, we're going to see how to set up Visual Studio Code, our editor, to work with the GCC compiler that we just installed in the last lecture. We are going to start Visual Studio Code like you would any other application. So let's say Visual Studio Code here. And I will have a folder set up that I am going to use to set up Visual Studio Code for GCC here. What you should do is create a folder somewhere on your system and work with it and do whatever it is we are doing here. That's going to be the number 6 folder here, VS Code GCC configuration. I am going to drag and drop it in my Visual Studio Code editor here. But before we do, make sure you notice that it is an empty folder, so nothing special here. So let's grab it and drop it on our Visual Studio Code instance. And Visual Studio Code is going to open a project in this folder. The first thing we're going to do is to create a C++ file that we would like to compile with our GCC compiler. You do that by clicking on the plus icon here, and we are going to give it a name. We're going to name it main.cpp. And once we do that, I will grab a copy of the C++ code that we will use to test our compiler. I don't want you to worry about the content of this file. This is really meant to let you test your compiler to make sure it is working in C++20 mode. If you want, you can go to the GitHub repository for the source code here, and you can grab this code and use it to do whatever it is we are doing here. I may even add the link to this source code as a resource to this lecture so that you can grab it easily. So let's copy this. And we will come back to Visual Studio Code, and we have a piece of code we can try out here. Now, we want to compile this in C++20 mode. The first thing we need to do is to set up our GCC compiler as one of the compilers we can use to do things. What we are going to do is come to terminal, and we are going to say configure tasks. And once we do that, you see that we have a bunch of compilers available for us to use. We have cl.exe, we have Clang, but we want the G++ compiler. And if we browse through the list here, we will find the G++.exe compiler. If we hover over this, we will see that it is in our path. Let's make sure we have this highlighted here. This is in our C MinGW64 bin. It is our G++ executable. So we are going to choose this. Let's make sure we go back, configure tasks, and choose the G++ compiler. We have many here, but all you really need to do is to choose one. So let's choose the G++1 here. If we do that, this is going to create an entry in our tasks.json file. If you don't already have a tasks.json file, by the time you do this, it is going to be created for you automatically. And that file is going to show up in the .vs code folder. I want you to notice that. So what we want to do is to modify this to do what we really want to do here. So I am going to go back to my GitHub repository and find a project that I have done before, and we are going to steal from that to really save on some time here. Let's copy this thing here inside the args section here. Make sure you copy the same thing as me. I am going to copy this, and I am copying so that I can avoid typos. I have had many students make typos here, and I am copying here to make sure we have the same thing, and that's going to avoid any unnecessary frustrations. That's why I am doing this here. So go back to Visual Studio Code in your tasks.json file, delete whatever we had in our args section here, just like I am doing here, and paste in whatever you got from the GitHub repository. So that's going to say G, we want to build in C++20 mode. We want to build everything in our current folder that has the CPP extension. And our output is going to be a file named rooster.exe. That's what we are using here. The other thing we want to do is to build with the GCC compiler, and we want to put that message in our label here. So let's say we want to build with GCC. Okay, if you want, you can put in a version, but I'm not going to do that here. And this is really all we need to do here. We can close our tasks.json file and make sure we have our main CPP file here selected. And if we go to terminal and run task, we will have the option to build with GCC now. If we select it, we will see our build kickoff, And if everything is fine, this is going to build successfully and say build finished successfully. And we will have a binary file generated, which is named rooster.exe. And that's what we have here, build finished successfully. And we have a rooster.exe file that we can play with. So let's bring up a terminal window. We're going to go to terminal and say new terminal. The terminal is going to open in our current project. You see 6 VS Code configuration for GCC. And if we run Rooster, let's run Rooster. This is going to say value 3, and this confirms that our Visual Studio Code editor is working with our GCC compiler, and this is really all I wanted you to see. Before we go, I want you to get rid of these squiggly lines we see here, and one way to do that in Visual Studio Code is come to View and say Command Palette, and choose C and C++ Edit Configuration UI. If you don't see this menu pop up here, you can type this and say C++ edit configuration. If you type this, you will see this pop up and you can click on this. If you do, this is going to open another window saying C and C++ configurations. And here I want you to choose whatever makes sense for whatever compiler you are using. If you want, you can choose the GCC compiler here. You see we have it available here. If you want, you can use the Clang compiler, but we're not talking about the Clang compiler here. So make sure you have a compiler path here selected for whatever compiler you want used for IntelliSense. But what I want you to do here is come all the way to the bottom and choose the C++ standard that is going to be used by your IntelliSense. And in here, we want to choose C++20 as the standard. Once you have this selected, you can close this. And you will see that the squiggly line is going to go away, and Visual Studio Code is going to understand your C++ code better, which is in C++20 mode. And this is really what we wanted to do here. Again, make sure this is compiling. If you go to terminal, run task, and choose build with GCC, this should compile your code and say build finished successfully. Once that happens, you will see a rooster.exe file pop up here. And if you run it, it should say, let's clear. We have some mess going on here. So clear and run Rooster. This is going to say value 3. And again, don't worry about the content of the code here. We will have a chance to understand this. At this point, we were concerned with making sure we can use our Visual Studio Code editor and use the GCC compiler to compile our code. And we have achieved that. I am going to stop here in this video, and I will see you in the next one.